I think of tools like this as hammers. You can either use them to build a house or you can use them to bludgeon somebody to death.
Hey, what's going on? Jayson Gaddis here with the Smart Couple Podcast. Welcome back, and welcome if you're new. Good to have you here. We get serious here about long-term partnership and how to do it well because it's kind of a shit show out there for most people. After many years, it turns into a deadening, complacent cesspool, or it just gets aggressive and distancing, and the people just can't resolve their shit. And then people get separated, break up, get divorces. So my job is to help people have a good time at long-term partnership and enjoy themselves. If you're going to live with someone, you may as well enjoy it, right? If you're going to spend many, many years traveling the metaphorical world together of your lives, and you're going to share that together, why not get some power tools and the best gear to do that well? Yeah? Seriously. And if you rely on outdated, tools in your conditioning that you just grew up with, you're going to suck at it and you're going to fail. And it's going to be very frustrating for you and hurtful. So here at the Smart Couple, we teach you how to learn, just like, look, you got to learn this stuff. And no one taught it to you. It wasn't in school. Your parents taught it to you merely through their modeling. And most of us got some interesting modeling, we'll say that, just to be PC here. And you got what you got. So if you've got what you got and you rely on what you got, you're not going to get very far, all right? So you got to learn, guys. And I'm in the business of helping you learn how. We have guests, we have experts, we have my wife, we have me, we have couples once in a while. And we even occasionally have the listener come on to the podcast to help you have a good time and have a good relationship, right? And this isn't a podcast that's about mind-blowing sex or mind-blowing relationships or ridiculously awesome, extraordinary, outstanding, fascinating, kick-ass, killer relationships 100% of the time. We're not into hype here. Okay, we're into grounded relationships that work. And those are challenging to do, but my wife and I have seemed to figure something out, and we want to share that with you. And because it's working over here. And we just had another challenge the other day, and once again, my theory of working through conflict on the other side awaits a stronger version of you two was true. We just got through it, and now we're more connected and stronger. That's just the deal when we have tension in our partnership. But to know how to work through these conflicts and challenges is essential, and working through differences is essential, as you'll find out today. But first, quick announcement. You'll notice we have a new logo on if you're in iTunes or Stitcher, or if you're in the Smart Couple community on Facebook, you'll see there's a new logo. It's just been modified to make it a whole hell of a lot cooler looking. So I want to thank Steve Schroeder for this logo enhancement upgrade. And you'll notice it, I think it's pretty cool. And I think it gives us a fresh new vibe that is more congruent to who we are and who we're becoming here at the Smart Couple. I think Steve really nailed it. If you want to learn more about Steve and his design work and his freelance work, you can find him in the show notes, okay? Steve Schroeder, and it's spelled very different than it looks or sounds. So definitely go to the show notes and follow up with Steve if you like that logo and you want something similar. I'm guessing Steve can help you out. Steve's also a student in the relationship school. He's also an apprentice in the relationship school, and just one of the core students here, helping us carry forward the mission of the relationship school. Thanks again, Steve. Now, today I have Joel Markwitt and Antonia Dodge. They're a married couple, and they're creators of Personality Hacker, a new kind of publishing company that merges digital media with emerging models of human development. They focus on helping people create more happiness in their lives by understanding themselves and others. And they have a great podcast. I was featured on their podcast, and their podcast is fun and makes personal growth fun, I think. And they're funny, and they're smart, and they have a good time. And they figured something out with their tools. And I like them because they're real, they're honest, they're engaging, and they introduced new terms for me, as you'll find out here, one of which is social technologies. And I really like that. You'll hear Joel set this up, but I was like, ooh, social technologies. That's kind of what we're doing here at the Smart Couple podcast. I'm teaching you social technologies, right? Relational technologies. And so many people focus on technology, as Joel says, and why not focus on the missing technology that everybody needs help with, which is relational technologies. And I'm in that business. That's my wheelhouse. That's what my mission in life is, and that's what I love to do. And again, remember, that comes from being such a failure at it. I was so frustrated. I was like, okay, time to learn how to do relationship. And I did. And I'm still learning. So I'm a student and a teacher of relationships, of human interactions, of human connection. It's really fun. I love my job. Okay, in this episode, it's really cool because we get pretty techie around the Myers-Briggs and personality models. And then we dive into some just practical, real-world examples from Joel and Antonia's parenting and their relationship and how they work through differences. And I think it's going to be really, really useful for you. Then we talk about, toward the end, we talk about the traps and underpinnings of any personal growth tool and how it could be used to sabotage your relationship or manipulate someone. So that felt important that we went there, and Antonia describes that well, okay? And let me know how this goes. I think it's a good episode. I'm psyched about it, and I just like these two. And my guess is you're going to get some value. And go check out their stuff at the end. I'll give you a link to where you can find them. And as always, stay tuned for your action step at the very end. All right, welcome to the show, Joel and Antonia of Personality Hacker.
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
Jayson.
thank you.
Yeah, so psyched to have you guys here. Good to talk to you again. I was on your podcast a while back, and I really appreciate how you're helping the peeps out there with through personality types and just what you're doing. Can you give us a sense of what you're doing? Like, what's your thing?
Well, okay, so right now the world is changing rapidly, right? We see new biological technology coming online all the time. We see new consumer technologies coming online all the time. I mean, Silicon Valley is exploding at the time of this recording. But there's not a lot of people focusing on social technologies. There's a few places that are doing this. But as we evolve as humans and we get more tool sets in our lives, we need social technologies to be able to help us navigate this new space.
Totally.
So what we do here at Personality Hackers, we help develop and teach people models of human development and social technologies they can latch onto and use for their personal growth. That's basically the gist of it.
Yeah, I love that. That's just why I'm having you here, because I'm geeked out on, I actually haven't heard that term, social technologies. So thanks for introducing me to that one. Because, man, we need to get along. There's so much changing quickly and rapidly, and so much is happening. And it seems essential, whether we're going to Mars or living in community or whatever, it's important that we have social technologies. So what specifically, can you just give us a sense of the social technologies that you guys like? And then we'll dive into those with some examples and hear a little bit about your background.
Sure.
Sure. So we're model collectors. We collect models of all shapes and sizes, and it kind of goes back to what Alfred Korzybski said a long time ago when he came up with concepts like general semantics. And there's a sense that we just accept reality as it's given to us. and we don't do a lot of questioning around some of the models. We don't recognize that they're even models. We assume that they're reality. And so most of the models that we like are ones that Korzybski would call a map. So one of his very famous lines is, the map is not the territory. But traversing a territory is much easier when you have a map. So a lot of the models that we collect are essentially maps. They're not realities, they're not truths, but they are ways of navigating difficult spaces. And so for us, we've noticed that social technologies, as Joel just mentioned, are not always easy for people to adopt, because especially if they go contrary to something that somebody believes is reality, like they've been given a model or template for life, and they don't really want to let go of that because that's how they've seen all of reality. And so if you introduce a model that goes contrary to how they see reality, they might have trouble even acknowledging its existence. They might, dismiss it, very easily dismiss it. But the one thing that everybody's really interested in is themselves and learning more about who they are. So our entry point social technology is around personality types and personality psychology, because most people are very open to learning more about who they are. So we do a lot of typology models like Myers-Briggs and the enneagram. We like what we call vertical models, or models of development, like spiral dynamics, or what's called the Graves model. So we have a tendency to collect a lot of different maps and models and then try to make them very simple to understand for, as basically as an entry point, so that people can get used to these concepts of social technologies, recognizing patterns and recognizing how to use a map, not overvalue it, not believe that it's their identity, but just get used to this idea of a map that helps you traverse the territory of the complexity of who you are. And then from there, then people have a tendency to be more open to different styles of maps and models. And then we introduce those as people go down their path.
Yeah, and it sounds like once we start to if we're interested in the conversation around understanding ourselves with these maps, it probably implies that we're interested in studying and learning about other people using those maps. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that's what happens. My observation has been that when somebody, say, discovers what their type is in Myers-Briggs system or the enneagram, and they get a really good, solid description of what that means, they give themselves, or they have a tendency to give themselves, permission to be who they are, maybe for the first time ever. Mm-hmm. There may have been a lot of messages from people in their lives that told them that something about them that was intrinsic is, from the outsider's perspective, flawed somehow or wrong, because that wouldn't be their choice. Maybe it was a parent or an influencer in your life that said that this aspect of who you are is not acceptable. But then you read a description of who you are based on this model, these patterns, and you go, oh, well, that's something that I just came with. That's just a part of my wiring. And then people relax into that. And if somebody truly relaxes into who they are and gives themselves full permission to be themselves, my observation has been that the next natural step is to give other people permission to be who they are. Yeah, it's great. Like we don't give each other permission because we have scarcity around it for ourselves. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful in relationships. Because a lot of times when we find our mate's behaviors unacceptable, it's usually because we feel that people are finding our behaviors unacceptable. Mm-hmm. So if we rest into who we are and give ourselves permission to be that thing, whatever, or that person, whatever that is, then we aren't in scarcity. We have like an abundance now of acceptance and approval. And then we just naturally give it to the person that we love the most.
Okay. So I'm hearing that maps like Myers-Briggs can help us relax a little bit around our kind of neuroses, or however we've been labeled, and feel maybe normal that, oh, like I'm just a type 3, or I'm just an INFP or J or whatever, and other people are too, and I'm not crazy. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times in relationship, for example, there are ways that people will approach life and the relationship and child rearing or managing the home or whatever that's very unique to their type. And oftentimes it's just a conflict of how they're, like, two people that are a couple are seeing the world. They might just be seeing different things. They might organize their world a little differently. They might show up with different, not necessarily values. They might have shared values. That's what got them together. But they might have different values and what's important, or the prioritization in the moment, like during the day, for example. And so a lot of conflicts, a lot of resolution can come from understanding how your mate, your spouse, your lover is wired, and how you're wired, and how there are things that overlap and also things that are like off kilter from each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, let's, two things are coming up right now. I want to hear an example maybe from your own marriage about that, how you've used the tool in a moment of crisis or challenge. But I want to back up a couple steps because I skipped over it, which is, how did you two get into this? And was this something you found separately, or you found together, or one of you was into maps and these kind of tools? And like, how did you stumble across this? And give us a little bit of the story there.
Both of us have been into understanding personal growth and latching on to maps and models in our lives for a long time, probably since we were teenagers, even, preteens, I guess. We both actually met at a neuro-linguistic programming conference, an NLP conference. So we both met in the context of studying maps and models and how the brain works. And this is like 6 years ago. And we fell madly in love almost on day one. And we pretty much haven't been apart since, because we had that shared common value. Antonia brought a lot of the personality psychology end of it. She had a lot of experience there, and she was developing some teachings and some programs. And I brought a lot of the business, marketing, communication development end of it. So when we got together, it was like this powder keg of, hey, let's create something that's expressive that we can create. And, we have a podcast, we've got a lot of video and a lot of content we've created together around these social technologies because we're so into them already. So it was a marriage made in heaven from a relationship standpoint, but also the different skill sets we brought. It was really an interesting blending business, marketing, and typology that we merged and created Personality Hacker from.
Yeah.
And what are your personality types?
I'm an ENTP in the Myers-Briggs system and 3 in the enneagram system.
And I would be an ENFP, Myers-Briggs system, and Enneagram 6.
Okay, and unpack those briefly for the listener who might not be familiar with those.
So what we just mentioned for Myers-Briggs is what's called the 4-letter code. We also call them dichotomies. So there's introversion or extroversion, which is connoted by an E or an I. Extrovert would be E, introvert would be I. The next two is sensor or intuitive, which is S and N. The third set of dichotomies is thinker-feeler, which is T or F. And the last set is judger or perceiver, which is J or P. So if I'm an ENTP, that means I'm an extrovert, intuitive, thinker, perceiver. Now, that's generally the amount of information most people have around Myers-Briggs. They're familiar with a 4-letter code. They're familiar with a set of 16 different possible combinations of personality types. And they might even be familiar with a brief overview of what those personality types look like. But and to some extent, it's understandable because Myers-Briggs has predominantly been used in the business world. I mean, that's kind of its roots, actually. The original test assessment, the MBTI assessment, was created to help women discover their talents and find a place in the job crisis of World War II. Because World War II, the men were off in battle, and there was all these different jobs that needed labor, and women were entering the workforce by necessity for the first time. And so Myers-Briggs, Isabella Briggs-Myers and Catherine Briggs, developed the MBTI to help women find a place in that job crisis.
Oh, cool. So, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so that's kind of an interesting piece of history. And so it's been predominantly used in the business world or in the job world. And in order to make anything like useful in that context, unless it's going to be intrinsic to what you're doing, most people just get enough information to make it useful in that situation. And so the very top layer, which is those dichotomies and the 16 combinations of personality types, is pretty much what you need to know for the most part in order to help with a certain level of job placement. But that's actually, the 4-letter code was not intended to be the full story.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a deeper cut, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's the very tip of the iceberg. It was actually built on Jung's concept of what he called cognitive functions, or the mental wiring of our mind. And so the 4-letter, we call it the 4-letter code, or the 4 dichotomies, was almost like a decoder ring to tell you what your mental wiring is, your favored cognitive functions. And there are 8 cognitive functions in total. 4 of them are what are called judging processes, or we call them decision-making processes. So they're ways of evaluating information to determine its importance. And 4 of them are what are called perceiving processes, or we call them learning or understanding processes. And they're the things that catch your attention. They're the ways that we learn information best, and they basically inform the part of the elephant we're going to be looking at, so to speak.
Okay.
So Combine those two, everybody has a decision-making process that's their favorite, and everybody has a learning process that's their favorite. And just knowing those functions, just knowing the criteria you're using to evaluate information, especially in comparison to, say, your spouses, will give you an enormous amount of information to determine why you guys are, say, fighting over basic stuff.
Yep.
We're looking at different things. So even though I'm an ENTP and Joel's an ENFP, that sounds very, very similar, and they are very similar types, we actually have very different decision-making processes. And so a lot of our conversations are around like determining whether or not we're making decisions that are best for us as individuals, because we're using different criteria. If I use the same criteria Joel uses, I'm actually up a creek, and vice versa. If Joel uses the criteria that I would be using, he's up a creek because that's not his best fit. Mm-hmm. So giving each other space to come to a conclusion in a different manner than we would be coming to that conclusion, that alone mitigates a lot of tension.
Yeah, I bet. So Joel, what does yours stand for?
Mine is a ENFP, so extrovert, intuitive, feeler, perceiver. So where I differ from Antonia, whereas she's a thinker, I'm a feeler. And what's really interesting about this in a dynamic of a couple, the caricature of men in the world is very thinker based, very logical, very headspace, and the caricature of women in the world is very feeler based. Ruled by emotions. Emotions are part of the experience at all times. And Antonia and I are wired very different than the social conditioned caricature of men and women. I'm a feeler man, and she's a thinker woman. And so that just alone, you can see how that's a very different wiring than we see in popular culture, or what people assume men and women are wired like.
Totally. So what's an example of maybe a decision or something you guys navigate where Joel feels his way into it and Antonia thinks her way through it? Where you guys are different there.
I would say, like, for example, we have a 4-year-old daughter together. So child rearing, being parents is a different experience for us. Antonia is thinking in terms of what makes sense, what is logically consistent in how she deals with our daughter Piper. Mm-hmm. And Piper is probably a little bit similar to me, where she's got a lot of feeling nature, and she can almost hijack my feelings and get me to go along with things that I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm more, I can be... I can be manipulated a little bit more by her because I open my feeling process up, and she can get in there and like manipulate me in some ways. And then sometimes it works the opposite, because Antonia is not a feeler. Little Piper can manipulate Antonia because Antonia's not aware of some of the feelings that the Piper's using to manipulate her. And here I'm aware. I'm like, I see what you're doing there, kid. I would do the same thing if I was 4. So it's a really interesting experience when you're a parent to see how your children can utilize these things and where you show up as parents.
Well, what I like about what you're saying here is if you didn't know these differences about each other, Joel, you could start to try to get Antonia over to your side of like, honey, you just got to feel this one. Like, come on, like feel this. And if you didn't know maybe her typology, you guys could sit and like you were saying, Antonia, just a lot of tension, a lot of arguing just around that point, because you're not embracing that the other person actually does it a little differently than you.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest components in this is not even so much like our differences and how those are flaring up. I think it's more having an awareness around the other person's wheelhouse, right? Like their natural skills and talents, and recognizing when they've hit a limit on that. And so being able to meet each other's needs and not have a concept of how somebody should be showing up. So take, for example, child rearing with Piper. As a thinker, like I enjoy being a parent. I enjoy being a mom. I love my daughter. And I also I think I have a lower threshold than maybe some other people do for like child rearing. Like I get to a point where I'm like, I need to go be alone with my thoughts. I can't be nurturing like and giving. I have like a very clear moment where I'm like, okay, I'm done. I've got to go play a video game, right? Like I'm like, I seriously have to go, I have to go pick up.
Yeah, different deal.
I have to go play an RPG or something or a first person shooter just to like get some emotional space and distance, and then come back and return to parenting. And I think that if Joel wasn't aware of me being a thinker and having sort of an emotional cap on meeting other people's needs, that threshold, he might not be willing to give me that space. He might think, what's going on with you? What is the problem? Like, especially since all his previous relationships were with feeler women. And so for them, that wasn't the case. So what's going on with me? Like, am I just abandoning a ship? What's happening? But because he understands that, he knows I'm going to come back, right? He knows this is just meeting a need temporarily, and I'll be returning, and I'm not abandoning anything. I just have that need. And then the same thing with Joel. Like, I've also noticed that this helps in tag teaming our strengths, because I have a tendency to, in a highly heightened emotional space, I have a tendency to get real, like, I'm trying to think of the word,
aggressive.
But not aggressive, but like very, like I just kind of get surgical. Like, I'm like, okay, this is the thing we're doing, and we're going to focus on this. And I assert my will onto the situation because I don't understand the emotions that are at play. They just feel like they're getting in the way. Yeah. Whereas Joel has extraordinary, what I call emotional Aikido. Yeah. Like the ability to help move the energy of the emotion into a different one. So if Piper is in a particularly, a very understandable traditional 4-year-old temper tantrum, right? Like that's very common for 4-year-olds. Yeah. He's super good at just shifting the emotional energy from despair, like the 4-year-old version of despair, into joy, or like just helping her work through the emotion so that she can get to the other side and not be there permanently. And because I know that about him, instead of stepping in and going, what are you doing? Like, you're just spoiling her, or whatever, like whatever my story would be around why that's not okay, because that's not how I'd go about it. I give it to him. I'm like, this is, tag, you're in. Like, you absolutely can navigate the space way better than I can. So it's also a matter of getting each other's needs met and recognizing each other's strengths, recognizing each other's weaknesses and where we're going to cap out, and being able to dance way more elegantly than we would have if we didn't have this information about each other.
Yeah, I mean, for the listener, if you're catching this, this is such an essential point to what they're modeling here that I'm hearing is a real ability to work with each other's differences. And the Myers-Briggs is one tool they use of probably many to do that, to like embrace each other, that, oh, you're different than me, you do it differently, you think differently, you feel differently. So rather than try to get you over to my way, I'm going to embrace your way, and we're going to somehow navigate that terrain, in my world at least, more effectively. And it just seems like you guys are able to do that. I'm sure you stumble, but you have tools, right, that where you're able to embrace each other's differences and work with them.
Yeah. Yeah, and from a conflict standpoint, like an example of a conflict, there's things we're looking for. So we're like, let's say we're in a heated debate about something. One of the things that I'm looking for, because I'm a feeler man, and the feeling process I use, the actual mental wiring or cognitive function, is technically called introverted feeling. We've nicknamed it authenticity here at Personality Hacker, and it's all about what resonates with me. It's all about what are my inner values, what's my core values, what's in alignment for me as a person. And oftentimes it's hard for me to articulate that because it's something I feel so deeply. Yeah. It's such a feeling process. I know it to be true because I embody it, but my words are jumbled. They're mushy. I can't get the clarity out of my words. And so what I'm looking for from Antonia when we're in the middle of an argument or a disagreement, what I'm really seeking is validation for the emotions I'm experiencing, even though I can't articulate those to her. And what she's seeking, because she uses a mental process for her decisions, which is technically called introverted thinking, and we've nicknamed it accuracy. She's looking for clarity, for what makes sense, for logical consistency. Mm-hmm. So you can see already that I'm having trouble with the words because I'm feeling something really strongly. So my words are jumbled. I'm looking for validation, and here she wants clarity, and I can't give her clarity because my words are jumbled. And she's taking specific words I say, and she's latching on those words and saying, well, you said this precise word. Logically, that makes this, and this reality. And she's looking for me to be more clear. I'm looking for her to validate. And you can see how that, in the middle of an argument, we got to stop ourselves and go, wait a minute. She often will just say, you know what? I validate how you're feeling. I totally get this might be a real experience for you, but can you see it this way of how I'm seeing the logical inconsistency of what you're presenting to me? And I'm like, okay, I can put myself there. And then I'm working with her to say, well, that logical, that logical consistency you have there also makes people feel this way. Can you at least see that? And she's like, oh, okay, yeah. And like we have these conversations, and we try to get out of that loop.
Yeah, well, and I was going to say one of the major ahas that we've taken away from recognizing each other's decision-making function is that I have to assume that your words are not very precisely chosen. Like you're just trying to convey an emotional experience, and the words you choose that's just almost like a first stab or attempt. Right. Whereas I use my words very specifically. I'm very like, and especially as the stakes get higher,
and I'll read into them.
I mean every single word I'm saying. And so Joel will look for my subtext where I'm like, I don't have subtext. I am using very precise language. Whereas he wants me to read his subtext and not latch on to the words he's using in precision. And that took a while. Like we deep dive into this stuff all the time. We are very, we live and breathe this stuff.
Yeah.
And that awareness took us a while to figure out, where it was like, why are you taking every word I say as gospel? And I'm like, why aren't you listening to my very precise words? And so eventually it got to a point where I recognized I need to be reading his subtext. And it got to a point where he realized that he needs to be like, at least recognizing that I'm using very specific language, even if maybe my clarity isn't 100% there, because of course that is also the case. But it's just been, again, it's like the dance that you do is unique to your relationship. And how do you just make the dance more elegant? How do you just dance better together? And this awareness has helped us figure out our steps easier and call things way earlier in the process. Like what could have been a knockdown, drag out fight for 5 hours, it's mitigated in about 20 minutes of frustration. And eventually it's like, hey, is this a thing where you're using your authenticity? I'm using my accuracy. Like, is this what's going on? And we'll go, yeah, I think that's what's happening. So it puts like a tourniquet on it really quick.
Oh, totally.
And then we can go, even if we need some space. That's another thing is I oftentimes when emotions get heightened, I just need to walk away for a little while and I'll be back in about 10 minutes. But every time I left, oh my goodness, that was so invalidating. It felt like I was hanging up the phone on Joel, right? He was like, you're leaving and you're never coming back. And it was like, no, I'm just like the emotions are getting way too much for me to handle. And I just got to go chill for like a few minutes. And just that took a while to figure out. Once we did that, things got way better. So it's really a matter of putting language to things that are probably already in your conscious awareness to some extent. But once you have language, it feels so much easier to manage. And it feels validating to both people. It's like, oh, this is a thing. This isn't just like my weirdness coming up or your weirdness and I'm not okay with your weirdness. It's like, oh, this is how people behave. There's patterns around this. There's actually language around this. And can we give ourselves some space once we have language for what's going on?
Yeah, this is hugely valuable. So thanks for this. Would you say, for either one of you, question for either one of you, has the other person's way helped you get more facility or adaptability around that in yourself? In other words, has Joel's feeling senses and emotional center developed yours, Antonia, and vice versa? Has Antonia's thinking and rational, logical way helped you develop that in yourself at all, Joel? Or is it more, does it feel like, no, it's just not my kind of thing and it's foreign to me and I'll just stay over here and doing my thing? Like, what would you guys say there?
I would say unquestionably it's helped. Not only am I a thinker, but I was raised in a predominantly thinker household. And so while we had no problem being honest with each other, the emotional terrain was never really talked about or honored very much. And so one of the major challenges I've had throughout my entire personal development experience is just knowing what I'm feeling. Like I almost have to gauge my emotions like I would have friends. I have to watch my behaviors and go, oh, I'm sleeping in later than I should be. So that's probably a sign of something. Or like, I just don't feel motivated. That must mean that there's some emotion going on for me. So I'm almost blind to my emotional experience. And Joel has brought such a fidelity of emotions. He observes my behaviors. And he's like, I think this is probably what's going on for you. Or at least he provides a container for the conversation where now I have I'm not there, not even close, but I'm so much further along in the process of being able to just identify what I'm feeling in the moment. And that's something I've never really been able to do before Joel's facilitation.
Yeah, wonderful. And what about you, Joel?
Same deal. I mean, Antonia's helped me a lot with being very precise, being clear in my communication, helping refine. I have a tendency to conflate things together because I'm feeling them. And so I'm not paying attention to how clean sliced information is. And she's like, well, you've actually got two concepts there. You're mushing because you're feeling it, but those are actually two very different concepts. And I'll look at it and it'll help me parse those apart and have some experience around those. I mean, it's not like I'm an illogical person or I don't have a mind that can think, but it definitely helps to have somebody that's not, if it's my blind spot, that's her strength. And I can watch how she's processing information, how she thinks about things, how she clean slices information logically. And it's really a powerful tool to have be in a relationship with somebody that has this part that you kind of miss, and you can learn from them. So I think it's definitely a part that I've grown from.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, it's just, again, for the listener, so notice here's a couple who is using each other's differences as opportunities to learn more about themselves and to get stronger. So again, thanks for being an example for that, for the listener here. Nice. Are you guys, I'm curious how it was early on to navigate Joel's calling it more, and again, I would agree, Joel, that this is the feeling personality, whoever that is typically more female, right, in the gender boxes, in the gender roles, and the thinker is logical person is usually the man, and it's flipped for you all. Was there any shoulding early on about how you should be and you should be different, and did you guys get stuck on that for a while, or was that pretty straightforward from the beginning?
What do you mean at the beginning? It still is here for me, like at least for me. Okay. So I'm a guy, right? And like you get this message: here's how real men behave. Here's how you show up as a masculine presence. And I think there's a ton of conflicting messages for both men and women in
Absolutely.
But my experience, obviously being a man, is from my knowledge base, what I've experienced. And being a feeler man can sometimes be very difficult because you know, society, I think, projects onto men like this is how you're supposed to show up. Here's all the markers you're supposed to have. Yeah. And I can find myself even now still falling into, I got to have these like ways of behaving. I can never apologize. I can never, like these other markers that they'll come in. It's like, no, that's ridiculous. Like that's so stupid. Why would I embody that? Even though society's telling me this. So I don't think it's anything I've gotten over. It's something it's a continual refinement process. I think I've gotten a lot better, at least from my standpoint. I won't speak for you, Antonia, what your experience has been, but I know that it's still something that, society is not going to go away anytime soon. And then you on the other side, it's like, okay, well, just go ahead and embrace your feeling nature and just be that feeling man. And it's like, well, that's not really me either. I want to show up who I am authentically. I don't want to just be sitting, doing kumbaya meditations all day and like being very passive as a man. I want to be proactive and take the lead and show up for Antonia as her husband and as her lover. But I also don't do it in the whole, the John Wayne swagger type of way either. It's just,
you're finding your way.
Experience. Yeah, I'm finding my own way through this, and it's been a process. But it's definitely something that I think that I don't know if that's been your experience, Jayson, being a feeler man yourself. But I think that's something that we, society gives us certain messages and we have to find our own path. And I think when we do, we're unstoppable because you embody who you truly are at the deep core of your being.
Yeah. Well, am I going to subordinate to my conditioning and let other people tell me who I am as a man, or am I going to find that out for myself? Right.
Yeah. And I think women get similar messages, right?
Yeah. I was going to say, Antonia, what about you in terms of this gender dynamic?
Right. Well, I'm not sure if this is what you meant by your original question. Did we project shoulds onto each other? The answer to that one is I don't think we've ever done that. I don't think I've ever thought he should show up in a specific way because he's a man. And I don't think you've ever projected anything onto me that I should be showing up in a certain way as a woman, like fulfilling those archetypes or stereotypes.
I would say a little bit. With child rearing, I probably just defer to you.
Well, there are some assumptions.
You're the mom.
We make.
I'm like,
yeah. Like, as the mom, there are some assumptions that are made.
Step up more than I do, I think.
But I don't think that there's no make wrongs that are in there. Like, I don't think either of us have gone, well, you should be showing up in this different way and you're not, so therefore you're wrong. I don't think we've done that.
Okay, that's cool because that's pretty common. Like if there's a feeling man, sometimes the woman can be strong personality type and be shoulding her guy that you need to step up, you need to act more like a man, basically. And that there's so many crazy messages in that. So it sounds cool that you guys don't do that largely.
I think one of the reasons why too is there's actually two different styles of thinking. There's one called introverted thinking, another one's called extroverted thinking. And what's nice about the introverted thinking flavor is that which is one that I have. I mean, there's lots of good stuff that comes with the extroverted thinking flavor too, but for me, it tends to be pretty egalitarian, and there's not a lot of wrestling for power when you use introverted thinking. And I would say the same thing happens with introverted feeling, which is what Joel uses. So we have I think we have a really nice natural power, interdependent power structure, if that makes sense. Like both of us feel very, like there are certain domains that it's very clear that I'm the person who's over that domain. And there are other domains where it's very clear that Joel's the person over that domain. And for most decisions, we come together And so I don't think there's been a lot of wrestling of power, which is probably where a lot of that femininity and masculinity energy dances with, like trying to wrestle power from each other. I don't think we've really ever experienced that. But I would say what's nice is that because I'm a thinker woman, because Joel's a feeler man, what's nice is that we can sympathize with the other person's struggle there. We get how we're dealing with these messages, and we get how we're dealing with some of these stereotypes and trying to find our way. So I think what's been nice is that we've helped facilitate each other's growth. We've given each other permission to be different or other than, because we know what that feels like for us. And again, it's that permission thing, just having one more layer of being able to articulate what's going on. And in the relationship, giving yourself permission makes you want to give other people permission. But I think in a relationship, in a pair bond partnership, it's so super important for each other, to look at the other person and go like, I'm accepting you as you're showing up. I'm so giving you permission to be whoever you are. Like that doesn't mean that I don't want us both to be the best versions of ourselves, but I recognize that as you are right now, I'm completely accepting it, because I've learned to completely accept myself. And one of the things that the model does is that it gives you one more layer of access to that acceptance. And then it gives you one more, ability to accept the other person. And so that's been really nice to have that model to go, oh, the language around it, if we didn't have this model, before Joel would have been like, well, I just don't feel like other guys. And I'd have been like, oh yeah, I just don't feel like other girls. Or he's like, I don't feel like other men. And I'm like, yeah, I don't feel like other women either. And we would have probably talked about it and had interesting abstract conversations around it. And it would have always been something that we were trying to figure out. Whereas now we have language for it. It's like, oh, you're a feeler dude, I'm a thinker woman. Okay, well, that's probably what's going on for us. And so then the conversation becomes less about what's going on. It becomes less diagnostic. And then we can enter a prescriptive place, which is like, oh, well, you probably, it's probably healthy for you to find a group of women that feels very supportive and understands this part of you. So don't deny yourself sisterhood because you were just feeling distanced from other women. Like, understand this about yourself and go find sisterhood despite that. And the same thing with Joel, go find male friends, understand this aspect of you. Don't just feel like you're somehow divorced from all of them. So again, it's just the language that gives us greater prescriptive abilities because the diagnostic part is handled.
Yeah. I love the self-study that you two do, clearly, right? You geek out on this stuff and you've spent a lot of time jamming about this.
we do.
That's cool.
We find our relationship infinitely interesting.
Yeah, same here. My wife and I, it's like we stay up all night talking about this stuff. So I'm just feeling that connection with you two right now. Feels good. Okay, a few more questions. If a person is listening to this and they're kind of feeling interested, they're like, ooh, this is kind of exciting. Okay, I could type my partner, which has its own interesting trappings, of course. But it's also like, ooh, this could be really helpful in our marriage. Where do you recommend they start in general? And what would be a good first step for them, maybe through Personality Hacker?
Well, I want to tag something you just said, which is that this kind of journey can have its own trapping. I want to tag that because there's some pretty relevant pieces of information around what those traps can be, and I do want to mention those in a moment. But if you want to find out what your personality type is, if you're questioning it, or if you would like to know your spouse's and they're questioning theirs, we do have an assessment on our website at personalityhacker.com, which will help you discover your Myers-Briggs type. We call it the genius styles because we're more interested in those cognitive functions, which are the layer deeper than a lot of Myers-Briggs sites go into. So you can find your personality type and then go search. There's a drop-down menu at the top of our website, or the top of the homepage, which will give you all 16 types, and then just click on one of those, and then it will reference a bunch of free resources to learn more about your personality type and how you operate and how you work.
Yeah, great. Okay.
As far as the trapping piece, is it okay if I?
Yeah. I want to hear that. Bring it.
Okay. So one of the biggest challenges people have with the whole concept of typology is that it puts you in a box, and as it is frequently used, that is accurate. It is accurate that a lot of people utilize the tool to make things easier to understand. And the only way to make things easy or to grasp, especially humans, is to grossly oversimplify them because we're way too complex, right? Like in order to truly know a person, we don't even know ourselves and we're inside of our own experience 24/7. So to know another person is never going to be like, you're never going to fully be there. But because there's so many people to know, and there's so many different ways of going about it, and there's so many things that make us like these really complex, intricate individuals, the only way to really truly understand other people is to grossly oversimplify them. And when you don't know that that's what you're doing, when you assume that the tool, again, the map is not the territory, when you think the map is reality, not just a guide, and then you see these little boxes, these 16 descriptions, and go, oh, that's you, or that's me. Right? Like
7 billion people can fit in 16 boxes.
Yeah, exactly. When you massively over-identify with it. And when you first enter the space, it's very easy to do that because sometimes it feels like a tarot reading or like some sort of somebody's reading your mind. If you get your accurate type,
yeah, it's validating.
Of it, man, you'll go, I've never felt so understood by this, this digital page filled with words. I've never felt so understood in my life. And so it's really easy to over-identify with that description. And that's the dependent phase. If you're going to look at like Stephen Covey's, model in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he talks about dependence, independence, interdependence with people. And I think we also do that with concepts. When we first learn a really cool concept, I think we get dependent on it. Like we overvalue what it has to bring. And the challenge with that dependent phase is that not only do we massively overvalue it and assume that this is like a full description of who I am as a human being and a full description of you, and ergo put each other in boxes. The other thing is that we end up weaponizing it. Because anytime somebody does
I love that weapon.
Right?
Totally.
Anytime anybody does anything that we don't like, we just dismiss them by giving them a 4-letter code. Right? Like,
she's just a whatever, right?
Yeah, you're just an INFP. Of course you're going to do that. And it's just like, it's such an abuse of the tool. And I think of tools like this as hammers. You can either use them to build a house or you can use them to bludgeon somebody to death. Mm-hmm. Like it can go either direction. And it's really the user of the tool and their intent that determines how, the usefulness of that tool. So if you've been turned off by typology systems, you probably have engaged with somebody who used the tool a little clumsy. They probably overvalued it and they assumed that it was a full description of a person's unique individuality. And they may have even been marginalizing or dismissing based on this. And that's not the tool's fault. That's the user's fault.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes user error, right?
Too little information can be dangerous.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like a person just learned this and now they just they go crazy with it.
So there's kind of a word of warning here, just a word of caution, right?
Exactly. If you use the tool well, it will build all sorts of really cool infrastructures into your life. And if you use the tool poorly, then you will probably damage and destroy things. And the number one thing, like especially in relationships, the number one caution is to never use it against your mate, ever. Mm-hmm. Like if you know what their type is, I don't ever look at Joel and go, well, of course you're doing something stupid. You're just an ENFP. Like, of course you're doing that thing. I never say,
we don't want to shame our partner.
That's right. I have 100% removed that entire concept from my brain. It doesn't even exist there. And so when you're using it against each other, the tool has officially become a weapon and you need to abandon it as fast as possible. Like, throw it in the river. Don't use the tool. If you can't use the tool responsibly, don't use it at all. However, if you can use it and not weaponize it, not overvalue it, not think that it's a full description of a human being, then it is very powerful. So when you say the trappings, that, as far as I'm concerned, those are the trappings. And they're actually pretty easy to avoid as long as you're aware of them.
Yeah, great. Anything to add to that, Joel?
No, I think she summed it up well.
Okay, cool. So I want to, this is kind of a rewind, and it's as we exit the conversation here, kind of simultaneously, which is a little strange. But I'm just over here so curious about you two, and I feel like asking a more maybe intimate question as we start to wind down, and that's, what was it that brought you to personal growth, each of you? Like what was the light bulb moment, or what was the pain, or what happened that had you get interested? Because a lot of the listeners here, just to give you a little context, for whatever reason, they found this podcast or they found your podcast or something, and they're on a journey. They have a journey to make, and before they were asleep, maybe checked out, shut down, not listening, not paying attention, not honoring the quiet voice inside. So I always like to try to get a little window into what had you step on the path in the beginning. Just a short little story maybe from each of you.
Sure. So I think usually people come into personal growth from one of three places. We usually categorize personal growth in access points. And usually it's access through healing, achievement, or transcendence. So you're looking to heal from wounds, you're looking to achieve something, maybe success or business-wise, or you're trying to develop more spirituality or transcendence work in your life. And often one of those three areas is where you access personal growth in your life. And I think we all probably access different parts of those depending on where we are in life and our personal experiences. From my standpoint, my access point was through achievement, where I wanted to have my own business. I wanted to be successful. And from a very young age, I wanted to be in the creative fields, production, video, audio production. And so I would study business. And I remember picking up, like, in business, you read books like Think and Grow Rich, where Napoleon Hill in that book talks about thoughts are things, and this concept of like using your mind, developing your mind for success. And these ideas and these concepts started floating around in my mind at a very young age. I grew up in a very religious household, very fundamentalist religious Christian household. And so, we kind of look at religion as like the earliest social technology of personal growth, right? It's kind of like the way we all, a long time ago, started getting into bettering ourselves through these codified religions, in a sense. So I had an inkling of always striving for something better, but I think that achievement piece for me in business was what really set me down the road. And then in my first marriage, weirdly enough, I had a lot of healing to do in the midst of that because of some just terrible, terrible struggle, a lot of physical, verbal abuse from my now ex-spouse. And so I think in the terms of I initially set off and I knew a lot of resources based on the achievement end of it. So when I got into some struggle in my life, I turned to my religion, and there were some things that weren't working for me there. Some things, in fact, that I did that my religion told me to do that actually caused more problems than helped. And so I turned to some of the resources that I'd originally accessed, like Tony Robbins material or different Jim Rohn or different people like this during the midst of this turmoil in my relationship when I needed to heal. And I tried to kind of heal with an achievement frame, right?
Yeah.
And so now I'm going back and doing a lot of healing work now, but it pulled me into understanding things like NLP or neuro-linguistic programming or personality types. And that's what really pulled me in the direction of learning how frameworks, these ideas and frameworks and concepts where we can hang the reality pieces on and understand what's going on so we don't feel it at effect all the time. We can feel more at cause. We can understand the systems running and take more control of our lives. That's real abstract and kind of like more general description than a personal story. But that's basically the pathway for myself, how I got here.
Yeah, that's great. No, that was helpful. Cool. What about you, Antonia?
I also grew up in a very religious household, something that a lot of people would call, I think most people would call it a cult, although I never really experienced it as such. And I got to a place where it didn't feel congruent for me anymore, but I wasn't, because I had been so indoctrinated. It was a very long, painful path to graduate from the religion of my youth. And during the time period that I was doing that, I recognized a lot of living for other people's expectation and living a lot for other people's approval. And it basically was when the pain of living in cognitive dissonance outpaced the pain of losing that approval or the fear of losing the approval that I got for living for other people. When it finally happened, all my worst fears came true. I lost my entire support system. I lost all my friends. I lost my family because they weren't okay with me graduating from that particular religious structure. And so then I was kind of back to square one. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and had a couple suitcases and a dog, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to go. And so I went back to some of the technologies that I had always been fascinated by, even though I hadn't pursued them hardcore. And some of those technologies were things like typology and different personal development, things that had always been really interesting and intriguing to me, but I didn't feel permission to really go down that road. So for the first time ever, I felt permission and I started going down that road. And of course, I had a lot of healing to do as well, a lot of figuring out who I was in the midst of all of this, since I had been living for other people for so long. And so it became the thing, personal development became the thing that replaced it helped me discover who I was for the first time. It replaced all of the other messages that I had been given, all these voices in my head that I had to exercise. It became the ballast that I clung to in order to become not just survive the experience, but actually become the best version of myself afterwards. And because I didn't have all this mental real estate just being dry in cognitive dissonance, because I didn't have dissonance anymore. I had all this mental real estate and all this energy and all this ability to understand things without feeling like my brain was in a vice. That the speed of healing and the speed of I have a friend who says that when it comes to personal development, you can either walk across the country or you can take a jet plane. And a lot of the technologies I was pursuing felt like jet planes. Mm-hmm. I think I could have gotten here eventually without the tools that personal development provided, but I think the process would have been much slower.
Yeah.
And so I think I got I just got to a point where the slow technique of just bumbling my way through things and throwing spaghetti at the wall was no longer okay for me. I just was not okay with that anymore. And the tools in development got me to a place where I didn't have to go so slowly. I didn't have to throw spaghetti against the wall. There were these maps, maps to the territory. And so they were navigation guides. And when I got into a relationship with Joel, and he was just as interested in this stuff as I was, it was a no-brainer to then fuse our technologies together and fuse our tools together and then just continue to be in that space with each other in a relationship. And I like to believe our relationship is one of the highest quality that I know. And I think it's because both of us are just dedicated to that development and growth.
We actually wrote it into our wedding vows. Weirdly enough, this is an interesting story for the listener. We decided to do things a little different. We live in the state of Pennsylvania right now, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and it's the only state in the country that allows what's called a quote unquote Quaker wedding. I think we're not Quakers. We don't believe in the Quaker faith. They allow you to basically marry yourselves. You don't have to have an officiant. So we actually went one day to 4 years ago now. We went to a graveyard and we exchanged vows and basically solidified our marriage together in a very unique way. And
Beautiful.
Part of the vows we wrote in was this idea of growth, this idea of, the day we stop encouraging each other to grow, the day I look at Antonia and go, I don't know if I can grow with you anymore, or maybe our relationship's complete at that point. But it's so important to us to weave it into the fabric of how we started our marriage together, that we really are dedicated to it. And that doesn't mean we don't have obviously mistakes and stuff. We struggle all the time. But it's what it is it gives us a beacon, something to look toward, something to grow, something to focus upon. And we can point back to that and say, hey, we wove this into the fabric of the start of our relationship.
Yeah. And we're not going to sit here and get complacent and die. We're going to continue to grow and learn about ourselves. So it's really inspiring. Nice, guys. Wow. Thanks for sharing all that. Where can people find out more about you two?
Personalityhacker.com is the best place to start. We have a lot of free resources there. All the stuff we talked about was pretty high level abstract on this interview, but there's really practical, once you find out your personality type or the different parts about you, we have a lot of practical solution-based advice there, step by steps. Here, go do this thing, think about things differently here, understand yourself in this way. I think would really help you listening if you want to come over to personalityhacker.com and be part of that experience for yourself, understanding yourself more.
Nice. And I would disagree a little bit in that it was high level sometimes and it felt very practical sometimes.
Okay,
so
good.
Thank you. I think it was both.
Well, Jayson, I also want to say just thank you for doing this. I know you are really dedicated to helping couples, be the best they can be and have amazing relationships. And we just really are honored that you invited us to come on. Thank you so much for the work you do and all the impact you're making in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Focusing on a growth relationship. When you were on our podcast, it's been one of our most popular because you talked about the importance of of a growth relationship. And we're very grateful that you are putting that message out to the world.
Oh yeah, we actually have woven your podcast into all of our response messages. Like when somebody comes and takes the test, comes out of personality.
Oh, cool.
I think you're like, we give them a several day sequence of emails, of like how to grow yourself. And your podcast is on one of those days because it's been so high leverage. We got a lot out of it. And I think our audience has really gained a lot of insight by the stuff you brought to the table when we interviewed you.
Yeah, totally.
Wow. Thanks, guys. Very cool. Well, thanks for, again, being trailblazers, finding your own way together so that you can be a model for us, for couples out there. For being living examples of a couple that can actually do marriage, and as challenging and as intense and confronting as it is, I just appreciate your willingness to hack the tools that work for both of you and then share them with us. And just thanks again for all that you're doing.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, we'll talk soon. All right. I love how those two got married. Ellen and I have a similar journey of doing a very non-traditional wedding. We'll share that at some point. So, action step. Joel and Antonia had some great things to say in here, and I loved the conversation around basically getting to know my partner. Okay, they're more intellectual or conceptual. Words really work for them. Or, gosh, my partner is very emotional and sensitive that way. And that's the language they speak. So we need to know our partner. So again, if you are in a relationship, it's in your best interest, if you want to go the distance, to get to know how they operate and to not assume or put them in your box, like Antonio was saying. If you are with an emotional partner and you're more intellectual, then you're going to need to learn to drop into your heart more and your body if you want that kind of connection, you want to relate to them. And and vice versa, if you're the more emotional one and your partner is more in their mind in the realm of logic and ideas and concepts, then it's in your best interest to learn how to meet them there at times, right? So, like I say a lot in the podcast, we tend to attract our opposite, which helps us come into balance. All right, being a balanced human being is a good thing. And you have more range. Your partner is teaching you to have more of a range. Embrace that. Welcome their way because it helps you expand your way. So the action step is to get with your partner or a close friend or have a conversation, a very heartfelt conversation with your ex and say, hey, it seems like you're more in the realm of ideas and I'm more in the heart, kind of emotional center. And it seems like we had a lot of problems there, or we have a lot of challenges there. I listened to this podcast. It was really helpful. And here's what I suggest, right? And take some notes from what Joel and Antonia do in their relationship. How does the intellectual person come more into their emotional center and learn that language? And how does the emotional person come more into the mind to learn that language so that they can connect with their partner in that way? So you need to identify, the action step is to identify where you're weak and learn how to strengthen it. Learn how to expand your weakness. And your partner is 100% of the time helping you do that because they're triggering you into places in you that you haven't grown into. So welcome it. Okay? Don't keep trying to stay in your little box of your right way or your one way of living life. Welcome the upset because it gets you to be a bigger, stronger, more mature person with more facility, okay? So do that little mini exercise with yourself. Feel free to do it with your partner or an ex-partner if they feel game as a way to get to know each other and expand yourself, okay? Just identify the weakness, commit to expanding it. Great. Now, a few other resources for you. You can also go to jasongaddis.com/products where you can buy any number of courses from me. Now we finally have most of my courses available to you online. And you can check out a course if you want to learn how to communicate better, right? And if you want to learn how to do conflict, if you want to learn how to create an indestructible partnership, right? I have courses for men, courses for women, courses for both. And there'll be more coming. Also, I'm doing a free Facebook Live coming up Monday, November 14th. And this is all about how to deal with the family drama. We're moving towards the holiday season, and it's going to get a little intense for some of you when it comes to the family triangles and drama that happen around the holidays with the in-laws, with your parents, with their parents, with kids in the mix, and relatives and siblings, and all the baggage that hasn't been dealt with is in one room, right? So what are you going to do about it? Well, I'm going to give you a few tips on this Facebook Live, and we're going to also do one in December, right before the Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year, all right? So check it out. Go to Jayson Gaddis, facebook.com, go to facebook.com, Jayson Gaddis fan page, and if you like that page, and just subscribe to the notifications, you'll automatically get a notification when I'm live, all right? So that way you can join us Monday. Okay, everybody, have a great, great week, and celebrate the differences and learn to work with them.